Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our community Little Neck Douglaston Yom Hashoa commemoration. This year, unfortunately, due to the coronavirus pandemic, it'll be a little different, unique, but we're all very glad that we have these virtual Zoom meetings. There are so many others go to meetings. We will try to keep the same thought, agenda and ideas that we've done in the past, and we're just doing out of the comfort of our home. You will be muted during the time. If you see that you're not muted, please mute yourself. Let me see. The best experience, we recommend that you participate in this program with the speaker view and not just the gallery. This will be about the same length of time as we have in the past. And let's begin by rising for the national anthem that will be sung by Dr. Ken Kahaner.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight all the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and their rockets red glare, the dawn bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave? Oh, the land of the free and the home of the brave.
You may be seated. I am Rabbi Gary Green of the Marathon Jewish Community Center. I want to welcome you on behalf of Rabbi Yaffe, Rabbi Shifrin, Cantor Schron, and the entire Yom HaShoah committee to this year's Yom HaShoah service in memory of the 6 million who were murdered and to all the survivors who are no longer with us. Before we begin, I want to extend to Rabbi Shifrin and his family, who are unable to join us today, our deepest condolences on the passing of their beloved mother and grandmother, Golda. This year's service is different from all other years. First of all, we cannot gather together at the Marathon Jewish Community Center as scheduled because of the coronavirus pandemic. But the coronavirus couldn't stop us from coming together virtually in order that we may keep our sacred promise of remembering all those who perished in the Holocaust. But at this time, I'd like to pause for a moment to say a prayer of healing for this time of pandemic. Our God and God of our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bring blessing and healing to those who are ill with the COVID-19 virus. May the Holy One, full of compassion, restore them to health and vigor, granting them refut hanefesh, refut haguf, spiritual and physical well-being, together with all others who are ill. And may God grant strength to those who tend to them, as well as all the unsung heroes who work in essential businesses, who navigate the unfolding dangers of the world each day. Bless them in their coming home and bless them in their going out. We hope and pray that healing is at hand, and let us all say, Amen.
Amen.
Yom HaShoah is even more important today than ever before because we've seen a rise of anti-Semitism throughout the world and even here at home in the United States. The disease of anti-Semitism had lain dormant for such a long time that many of us thought it was a vestige of our past. We thought that the world had learned the lessons of the Holocaust. We are sadly mistaken. Even during our most recent holy holiday of Passover, the Eitz Chaim Shul, a Huntsville, Alabama synagogue, was defaced with swastikas. We must speak out vigorously against anti-Semitism, no matter who spreads it and where it may be found. We must join the ADL and the American Jewish Committee, whose mission is stopping anti-Semitism and defending the Jewish people. It also means fighting threats to our own democracy, including cyber hate, bullying, bias in schools and criminal justice system, terrorism, hate crimes, coercion of religious minorities, and contempt for anyone who is different. Yet, we need to realize that at least in America, 2020 isn't 1933, 1939, or 1942. We are not powerless. We are not alone. Back during the Holocaust, the police stood by, if not aided and abetted the Nazis and their accomplices. I'd like to share with you that every day, at different hours of the day, to make sure that we're safe, a car from the 111 precinct parks in front of my synagogue. We have allies in government as well as the interfaith community. We have the state of Israel, which is more than just a refuge, but a place where Jewish culture and ingenuity flourishes. We know that the Jewish state, Israel, defends Jewish lives everywhere in the world. So I want to thank you for keeping the memory of the 6 million alive in our minds and our hearts as we now continue our service. If you're able to stand, please rise as we shall experience how Israel observes a moment of silence on Yom HaShoah.
Okay. Thank you.
If you feel comfortable, please remain standing as Arena Star will lead us through the singing of the Hatikva, Israel's national anthem.
Kal od baleval pnimo, nefesh Yehudi omiya, ulofate mizrach kodimo, ayin litzion tzorhiya. Od lavda tikvateinu, tikvat shmot alapayim, lichyot amchoshi be'artzeinu, Eretz Zion v'Yerushalayim, lichyot amchoshi be'artzeinu, Eretz Zion v'Yerushalayim.
Thank you, Irina. Please be seated. We will now invite Sally Coons to sing Ani Ma'amin. I believe in the coming of the Mashiach. Even though he may tarry, I do believe. As we hear these important words with a haunting melody, we will see a slideshow of some of the camps that were the sites of suffering and death during the Holocaust. Azriel David Fostag reportedly composed the tune in a cattle car while being taken to Treblinka. The tune was sung by dozens of Jews as they marched to the gas chambers in the Nazi death camps. Ani Ma'amin, two simple words, I believe. Out of the darkness will come redemption, healing, and light. Sally.
Ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, be'emunah shleima, b'vi'at HaMashiach, b'vi'at HaMashiach, ani ma'amin, ve'af al pi she'yitmamea, im kol ze ani ma'amin. Ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, be'emunah shleima, b'vi'at HaMashiach, b'vi'at HaMashiach, ani ma'amin, ve'af al pi she'yitmamea, im kol ze ani ma'amin. Ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, be'emunah shleima, b'vi'at HaMashiach, b'vi'at HaMashiach, ani ma'amin, ve'af al pi she'yitmamea, im kol ze ani ma'amin.
Thank you, Sally. That was beautiful. And now we will call upon 6 individuals who are children of Holocaust survivors to each light a candle as we honor the memory of their parents who survived and the 6 million Jews who were murdered. We call upon George Klein, Ruth Katz, Linda Klein-Fingerman, Rhonda Kontner, Lenny Mazer, and Shirley Silverstein.
My name is George Klein. I'm the son of Holocaust survivors Elizabeth and Leslie Klein. The truth is, I know very little about my parents' experience during the Holocaust, as they would never talk to either me or my sister about it. They were even reluctant to let us watch TV shows about the Holocaust. We only overheard scraps of information when they would mention certain recollections to other people. We know that both my parents were sent to Auschwitz in the early summer of 1944. My mother came from a family of 5 sisters and 2 brothers, both of whom survived. Of the 5 sisters, 2 survived. While being transported to Auschwitz, the sisters were separated, and my mother, the youngest sibling, stayed with her oldest sister, Yuli. At Auschwitz, Dr. Mengele decided the fate of the newcomers, and my mother was chosen for the work group, but her sister was chosen for the shower group. By this time in the war, all the Jews knew what the showers meant, and my mother realized she would never see her sister again. When the soldiers had passed and were not looking, my mother grabbed her older sister and pulled her over to the work group. These 2 of the 5 sisters survived and returned to Hungary after the war. Despite these experiences at Auschwitz, or possibly in spite of them, my parents did not lose faith in God or an optimistic outlook. In 1956, the Hungarian Revolution was taking place and anti-Semitism was on the rise. My parents saw no future for Jews in Hungary, and so, carrying 2 infants, my sister and myself, they escaped from Hungary in the middle of the night. They eventually found their way to Canada and created a life for themselves and their family. My father passed away 35 years ago, and my mother recently passed away at the age of 97, having enjoyed her grandchildren and even great-grandchildren. Thank you.
On this Yom Hashoa, we cannot comfort each other by touch. So I now can begin to understand how it must have been for my parents, Ethel Bauer Katz and Julian Katz, to spend decades of their lives longing for the touch of those loved ones taken from them in the Holocaust. For Atunya Bat Asher Anshel and Rev Yechiel Yaakov ben Rev Chaim HaKohen of blessed memory, who survived the Shoah and gave me, my brother, and my sister life, and in memory of all the family members I was never able to touch, I light this candle and promise they are not forgotten.
Both my parents, Magda and Larry Klein, were born in different small towns in Hungary. At the time of the war, my mother and her family was transported to Auschwitz. She was there for over a year until liberation. She and her sister stayed together in the camp and both survived. After the war, they returned home to find one brother alive. Her parents and another brother were killed. She and her sister went to a DP camp, and then she came to America to an uncle who sponsored her as an orphan. Her sister married and had a baby in the DP camp and went to Canada. I have very little information about my father's history. He was taken to a labor camp where it was discovered that he was a pastry chef, so he was baking for the officers. He found a way to escape. He did not want my sister and I to know anything that happened in his story. He did not speak about it ever with us, and he did not speak with others about it, including my mother. He lost his parents and a brother. He had one brother who came to America in 1938, who was safe, and his sister also survived the Holocaust, but also we have no information about that sister, who also did not talk about her story. Unfortunately, my father's story and history died with him. My parents met in New York and they married. They had 2 daughters and 4 grandchildren by the time they died. My mother began to speak of her history during the Holocaust when my son was 3 years old, and he started asking her about her number tattoo. Then she told her story to the Marathon Hebrew School, to my children's middle school, and she joined the Speakers Bureau with other survivors who spoke in public places. She also recorded a Hashoa Foundation interview, which my father would not do for himself. It was only as adults that my sister and I started recognizing the uniqueness of our parents through many unspoken messages. This candle that I lit is in memory of them and the others killed during the Holocaust. Thank you.
My father, Hyman Kontner, was born in Vilnius, Lithuania in 1910, but the family relocated to Munich, Germany, where my father, his brother, and sister grew up. They assimilated and felt they were Germans, so they seemed surprised when the Germans came for them. His story becomes mysterious after that. I know his parents, brother and sister, and niece and nephew were all killed. My father was sent to a concentration camp in Siberia. When released, he didn't arrive in the United States until 1950. He was tormented by the fact that he had survived and his family did not. He did not speak about his Holocaust experiences, and although I read every book I could find on the Holocaust, he would not discuss it with me. On the 40th anniversary of the Holocaust, the commemoration really upset him, and even then he wouldn't speak about his experience. It really broke him and he did not recover. He was never really able to put the trauma of the Holocaust behind him, but I am happy that he married my mother and had a child, me, and I am honored to light this candle in his memory and the memory of all those who perished in the Holocaust.
My name is Lenny Mazer. I light this candle in honor of my parents who survived the Holocaust. My mother was on a train to Auschwitz, which she jumps off of, and my father and his brothers, who were living in the woods at the time, found her and took care of her, and they survived in the woods till the Russians came to liberate Poland. Then my parents got married, and I was born, and then we escaped to a DP camp in Germany. From Germany, we emigrated to the United States, where my brother and my sister were born. And I light this candle in honor of my parents and in memory of all those that did not survive the Holocaust.
My name is Shirley Silberstein. I have the honor of lighting this candle as a daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors. My mother, Susan Warren Gottheimer, and my father, Eric Gottheimer. Both of my parents were in the same Lodz ghetto in Lodz, Poland, and they survived the horror of Auschwitz. Except for my parents and one of my father's sisters, no one else from their families survived. After the war, my mother and father were both sent to Gauting, a beautiful spot in the German Alps, because they both suffered from respiratory diseases. It was here that my parents met when they were 18 and 25 years old. They got married and had their first child, me. My parents hated being in Germany because of all they had suffered, and when I was 11 months old, they were able to get a visa to immigrate to the United States, where 2 of my mother's aunts had moved before the war. We settled in Brownsville. My sister was born, and my parents began to build a new life here in America. My parents faced many challenges, but they were able to create a warm and loving home for me and my sister, Helen. My parents were determined to make sure that their children would have a good and happy life that they had been denied. They were so happy to live to see their children creating families of their own, and they had the nachas of having 5 grandchildren. I light this candle in memory of my parents who survived, to honor the memory of all those who didn't.
Please rise for the memorial prayer as we turn to God, who is the source of compassion, to share his compassion with the souls of all who were murdered in the Holocaust. Shelter them with his presence and grant them eternal rest. Shulchan Bamramim Hamitzay Menachanechana Hagan Vayashtina Mimalot Ginashim Adarim Kizaragia Vaziarim Et Kol Neshamot Shel Sheshet Milyonei Hayadim Chalilei Hashem Rabbah Shenega V'shenishchata Shenezreva V'shenezbo HaKiddush Hashem B'dei HaMeratzchim HaGermanim HaNazim V'Yazreim Yishar Amim L'chein Balarachamim Yastirem V'Zedek Rabav L'Olamim V'Yitzrar Mitzvah Chayim Nishmadayim Adonai Yonachal Adam Began Eden Temenach Adam V'yamdu Goralam Lekad Vayamim V'nomar Amen Amen.
Please join with me the Mourner's Kaddish. Yid Gadal v'Yid Kadash Shemei Rabbah. V'yalma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei. V'chayechon uvyamechon. V'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael. Ba'agala v'zman kariv v'yimru Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mevarach Le'olam Amei Amaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpawar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal Shemei Dekudesha B'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tush b'chata v'nechamata da'amiram v'yalma v'yimru Amen. Yehei Shlomo Rabbah min Shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen. Oseh Shalom b'mramav hu ya'aseh Shalom aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen. You may be seated, and I call upon Shirley Silberstein, who will introduce our keynote speaker.
My name is Shirley Silberstein. I want to introduce our guest speaker, Edith Schwartz. You may not know Edith. She's a member of our community. She's a member of Temple Torah. She raised her family, got married here, and she came here as a young child escaping Nazi Germany. Edith will give us an account of her life as a child in Nazi Germany. She'll speak about events that happened to her and her family which led up to their leaving the town where she was born and left at an early age. She gives us an account of the experience she and her family had while trying to obtain a visa to come to America, which they did get, and immigrated to America. The events of today bring up memories of the past. Edith will speak of the events of the past and how events are relevant today. After Edith gives her speech, her family will give their own accounts and experience knowing about Edith's life and how these experiences affected their lives and their Jewish identity. And now I'd like to introduce Edith Schwartz.
Presentation today is dedicated to my parents, Frida and Justin Frankel, and those 18 members of my family who were deported and murdered during the Holocaust at Treblinka, Sobibor, Theresienstadt, and the Kovno ghetto. I was asked to speak today about my personal recollection of events as a child in Nazi Germany. I found this emotionally devastating, especially because I am deeply concerned about some of the anti-Semitic acts that have occurred recently that are eerily parallel to my experiences in Germany in the 1930s, in the city of my birth, Erlangen, a city 10 miles north of Nuremberg. The earliest recollection that I have is from January 1933. The adults were whispering, "He got in." Who was he? Of course, it was Adolf Hitler, the new Chancellor of Germany. Instinctively, I knew that this was something bad, but how much could I understand as a 5-year-old? That same evening, I also remember being told by my parents not to look out of the window. We heard the marching feet. The flickering of the torches were visible even in the middle of the dark room. And we also heard the anti-Semitic chants about the Jews. You can imagine how I felt 2 years ago in August of 2017 when Charlottesville occurred with a mob marching down the street shouting the slogan, "Jews will not replace us." It was emotionally devastating, and that torch parade was terrible for me. In the summer of 1933, a sign with the words, "Jews not allowed," the use of the premises, and Jews are our misfortune, appeared on the outside of a beautiful park, which housed the swimming pool. Although I could not read the sign as a then 6-year-old, I was very upset to be told that we could not meet there with friends anymore. That fall, I also started first grade. I was the only Jewish child in my class. My teacher was a Nazi party member, and I was bullied by him. He called me Jew girl, which caused my classmates to shun me. It was obviously a lonely time for me. Just last month, I was horrified to read in the March 4th edition of the New York Times of a similar bullying episode of a high school student in Edgewater, New Jersey. Also, in the early 1930s, just after Hitler had become chancellor, I heard my mother's anxious voice talking to my father about the danger which he was exposing the family. Only in later years did I figure out the cause of her fear. It was that my father sometimes cared more about the fate of his congregants than he did about his own safety. For example, 2 college students and a shop owner were imprisoned by the Nazis for allegedly committing crimes against the fatherland. This was a phrase that was used for any trumped-up charges by the Nazis against any person that in any way leaned towards the left. My father was able to obtain bribe money from the Jewish community, and the Nazi mayor took it. The students were freed at night and fled to Switzerland. Sadly, the shop owner met his death in a concentration camp 10 years later. One day, it was 1934, I remember that my father came home with bandages on his head. He had gone to Ford, a neighboring village, to give Hebrew lessons to students there. I asked what happened. He said he had an accident. Instinctively, I knew something bad had happened. Just last year, a history professor, Martina Sivalsky, a current non-Jewish resident of Fort, the very village to which my father had gone, wrote a book about the virulent anti-Semitism that was rampant in the village at that time. In this book is a clipping from a Nazi newspaper of my father with a headline that reads, "The Jew Frankel attacks an SR member." My father, being accused of being the aggressor, was forbidden by the mayor from ever entering the village again. The facts were that my father was beaten by the SA man. My father was on the sidewalk parallel to him. The Nazi told him to get off the sidewalk. My father still believed in 1934 that justice would prevail, so he answered back to the SR man, "Decent people don't speak like that." My father was then beaten by the SA man with that bicycle pump. Furthermore, in 1936, Jewish children in my hometown were no longer accepted into the secondary school. As a 9-year-old, I was enrolled in a Jewish secondary school that had been established. I had to commute on the suburban train to the town several stops away. Can you imagine having to do this every day as a 9-year-old? It was very frightening. In 1937, I was aware that my parents also faced financial difficulties, from I overheard when my parents spoke with each other. My father was the cantor and led the services, faced a shrinking congregation. The congregation had shrunk from 162 families in 1923, when he was first employed, to 120 in 1933, and to 49 in 1937. This was mostly due to immigration. On April 28, 1937, the doorbell to our apartment rang. 2 Gestapo men came to the door, forced their way in, ransacked the office of my father, and took him away. We did not know for 5.5 weeks where he was. It was a terrifying time for my father, for my mother, my brother, and me. My mother was able to gain the help of the Federation of Jewish Teachers, and they engaged 2 lawyers. With their help, we found out that my father, another teacher, and a matzah baker were in a Gestapo prison in solitary confinement on charges of blood libel. The facts were, in 1928, a 4-year-old boy was murdered, and the local Nazis blamed the Jews for killing that child and using the blood in the process of making matzah. 9 years later, my father, another teacher, and the matzah baker were accused of committing this crime. This was an example of the Nazis' use of the old middle-aged fable. They accused the Jews of needing the blood of a Christian child for the baking of matzah. The use of this tale, unfortunately, has never quite died, even to this day. The arrest and abduction of my father was facilitated by Julius Streicher, the notorious vicious Jew-hating editor of the Nazi newspaper, The Stürmer, who had given orders for his arrest and the arrest of the teacher and the matzah baker. He wanted a show trial to inflame the population. Fortunately, it was 1937 and before Kristallnacht. 3 different Gestapo jurisdictions fortunately could not agree on how to proceed. The orders from the Berlin headquarters came to free my father and the 2 other men, having been in solitary confinement for 6.5 months. During this time, my mother had begged from distant American relatives for affidavits to enter the USA, and she was successful. My father was most reluctant to leave his home that had been the home of his family since the early 1800s, but was persuaded that his life was at risk, and he obviously had no future in Germany. With much difficulty, we got space on the famous ship called the Normandy and arrived in America August 15, 1938, 12 weeks before Kristallnacht, the horrifying and terrifying 9th of November. Emotionally, these were sad, worrisome, and difficult times. We were immigrants without means, as most immigrants. My father did not speak English, so he could not practice his teaching profession, although he would not work on the Sabbath. After 7 weeks in New York, we were able to move to Cincinnati. Rabbi Eliezer Silva, the head rabbi of the Cincinnati Jewish community, had told my father that he could work in the kosher division of Econ, a large Midwest meat purveyor. It was back-breaking work. My mother took in other refugees as boarders. My brother and I had to help after school. Until 1942, we continued to receive mail from our relatives who were still in Germany. My parents tried to get affidavits for them, but the high quota system did not permit anyone else to emigrate. Very sadly, all 18 perished in various concentration camps. Here we are in 2020, and we are dealing with conspiracy theories, with hate speeches against minorities, and marked rise in anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic attacks against Jews in Jewish institutions. I personally find this very troubling, since to me, what we're experiencing now is so much like what I experienced in my early youth. These fears have also been expressed by my European friends. For many years, I've been active in meeting people from German-speaking Europe. I've hosted many young people from Germany, Belgium, Switzerland, Austria, and Luxembourg. They have hosted me as well. They are all of the post-war generations and therefore had never met a German Jew before meeting me. These individuals have addressed how their families lived between 1933 and 1945. Several have written about my father's persecution and have been very active in combating intolerance and hate in their own neighborhood. These individuals, who are my friends, share the same concerns as I have about today's unfortunate reality of the rise in hatred and fear of the other. The title of today's service, Never Again, unfortunately seems so appropriate for our time. I so believe that the active involvement with others to try to change attitudes is essential to ensure that the phrase never again truly becomes a reality. more than just words. In view of my experiences to try to stop the hate and change attitudes, I believe the involvement of those who are members of the younger generation is essential. Therefore, I have asked representatives of my family, first and second generation who were born in America, to share some of their thoughts on how they have been affected by their family history, which I've just shared.
Thank you so much, Edith, for sharing your amazing story with us. It's an honor to know you and to hear about your experiences. And I especially enjoyed the part how you brought it to the relevance of what's happening today. Now we're going to have the opportunity to hear from Edith's daughter, Carol, her son-in-law, Andrew, two of her granddaughters, Rebecca and Tara, and her grandson-in-law, Brandon, who are all here with us this morning. In their speeches that were recorded earlier this week, we will learn how being children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors has impacted upon them and has played a role in forming their identities.
Parents' experience during the Holocaust and subsequent immigration had a profound effect on me. One of the most significant lessons learned from my mom has been the need to be resilient. My mom's ability to adjust in a new country, culture, language, as a young child was indeed very challenging, and she did so. I so respect her drive to become a respected professional in her field in conjunction with having a family. This was not common in her generation. She has truly taught me the lesson of the need to look at life in perspective, enjoy what is good, and manage through life's many obstacles. Another impact for me personally, where my mom has been a model, is the importance of sensitivity to other people, whether this be cultural, a different perspective, race, etc. Being a child of immigrants has provided me with a feeling for any person that does not have a traditional profile. I find that I've been provided with the gift of learning and listening in a way that I might never have experienced if my parents weren't different. I also have benefited from these experiences as I have grown professionally with ease in a global world. I am awed by my mom's ability to forgive much of what has happened to her and her family in Germany, to have current relationships with many people in Europe, and to share her story with others so that we never forget.
I really understood the Holocaust until I met my wife's parents, Edith and Walter Schwartz, and Edith's parents, Justin and Frida Frankel. Of course, I had studied the Holocaust in school and had read about it in books. Thankfully, however, both sets of my grandparents had emigrated from Eastern Europe to America in the early 1900s. So I didn't have first-hand knowledge of the Holocaust, except for some whispers that circulated from time to time in the family that cousins, aunts, and uncles had been lost. What I learned from the Schwartz-Frankel family was that the proper way to remember the Holocaust was not to get mired in bitterness and resentment, but rather to dedicate yourself to striving toward tikkun olam, that is, repairing the world, by observing the Torah's commandments and committing acts of kindness. I remember that to his dying day, Justin Frankel's faith in God never wavered. Because of this faith, he managed to endure months of imprisonment by the Gestapo, and later it spurred him to become a much respected and beloved member of the Cincinnati Jewish community, as was Frida Frankel, whose simple acts of kindness endeared her to all who knew her. Edith Schwartz, who became a professor of nursing, carried on the spirit of helping others. What I have found most remarkable in my mother-in-law's story is how she has repaired her ties with her hometown of Erlangen, where she had been expelled from school and suffered greatly through childhood. Through her forgiving heart, she has created a warm and wonderful relationship with the people of Erlangen today, living proof that striving toward tikkun olam is the best response to the Holocaust.
Hi, my name is Tara Roach, and I am the daughter of Carol Schwartz and Stephen Roach. May my dad's memory be a blessing. And I am the granddaughter of Edith and Walter Schwartz. May my grandfather's memory be a blessing. I feel lucky to have the heritage that I have received from my grandparents and parents who have always wanted to teach. When I was about 9, I went on a roots tour with my parents and grandparents, Edith and Walter, where both grandparents showed me where they initially grew up before having to flee to America. I had the honor to meet family friends, see firsthand the influence of my great-grandpa had on the Jewish children, learn the history directly from my grandparents of their families, and so much more. The impact this trip had on me is one that hasn't left me, 20 years later, as I find almost every trip I go on somehow manages to bring me back to this exact trip. There's important history deep inside our family, and as hard as it may be to speak about that past and what those feelings bring, my parents and grandparents found it within them to ensure that I learned about the hardships of which I am happy to remember and to embrace as part of my identity. As time goes on, I will continue to speak about these memories so that they will continue to be a part of our family for generations to come. As I've grown older, I have come to realize more and more how important it is that my heritage and grandma's story is something that is not lost. She is an amazing woman who continues to constantly give back to the community and ensures her daughters and granddaughters are always thriving. To have a woman like that lead the pack is quite amazing and influential. It's brought me an amazing mother who always ensures I am well situated in my day-to-day life, and an aunt who forever has my back. It has also brought me 4 first cousins who include me like a sister of their own. Although a small family, we are a tightly knit one. We are a family that ensures everyone is rising to the top and okay. A family that fights hard for one another. A family that gives back to one another. A family that looks out for one another. I believe these traits come from my heritage. Although some things and many people were taken away from us, I know that our family will continue in a strong dynamic that will never be taken from us. This is so important. We will keep living. We will keep thriving. We will keep loving from generation to generation. Thank you. Hi, my name
Hello, my name is Brandon Hammer. I'm Edith's grandson-in-law. My grandparents were not Holocaust survivors. They all grew up in the United States as the children and grandchildren of immigrants. Although my grandfather on my father's side fought in the US military in World War II, I didn't, until recently, have a close relative who had survived the Holocaust. When I was a kid, we frequently had lessons about the Holocaust and heard stories of survivors, including my classmates' grandparents. But it was never personal for me. Since becoming part of Edith's family, that has changed. Now the Holocaust is no longer an outrage and a tragedy that befell some other Jews and some distant relatives. Those terrors also affected my family too, and the woman who has become my granny. I think I felt this most poignantly when Megan and I looked at some of Edith's photos of her family. I've done this before with my parents and my grandparents, and it's always fun to put faces to names and learn about different personalities. But this feeling was different. These photos were from 1932 and showed people whose lives were abruptly destroyed a few years later. As a result, I would not get to meet these people or their children or grandchildren, not because of old age or distance or an unfortunate illness, but because the Nazis had injected themselves into their lives and taken them for no other reason than hatred. Having Edith in my life allows me to understand with a greater depth than before, not just the evil of the Holocaust, but the sheer and utter loss it caused. I'm immensely grateful that Edith and her parents not only survived, but created a beautiful and successful family in the United States. They are a testament to the American spirit and to what makes America so special. I am thankful every day to have them and Edith in my life. She has not only welcomed me into the family with open arms and delicious food, but allowed my wife, Megan, and me to carry on the family legacy with traditions and heirlooms that Edith and her family saved from the fires of the Holocaust. Our wedding rings, for example, are the same wedding rings that belonged to her parents. And one of the Kiddush cups from our wedding was a Kiddush cup that was saved from Germany. These heirlooms allow us to continue what the Nazis tried to stop, our traditions and our community. Edith, I am so honored and thankful to have you as my granny.
My grandma's experience in the Holocaust has shaped my family's core values involving the importance of education, family, and Jewish identity. Each of these values share a common thread in that they place a focus on non-material things and focus instead on nurturing key bonds and inner purpose. My grandma is an inspiration in many, many ways, and I've learned a lot from watching her example. One value that has been repeated in my family throughout the generations is the importance of education. After she and her family lived in Cincinnati for several years, my grandma moved away at the age of 17 to pursue nursing in New York. She later became a professor, which was especially rare for females during that time. My grandma's parents encouraged her to pursue her educational dreams, as my parents encouraged me to pursue mine. I believe that my grandma's experience in the Holocaust demonstrates that education, once obtained, can never be taken away. This is a lesson that she has imparted to us all. The Holocaust brought tremendous loss, including the death of many loved ones. My grandma lost members of her extended family, and she escaped only with her immediate family to America. I think that my grandma's early experiences shaped her view that family is of the absolute utmost importance in this world. She and my grandpa nurtured the close bonds in our family. My mom and dad, in turn, passed this lesson on to my sisters and to me. My aunt and uncle did the same in terms of passing along that lesson to my cousin. Finally, my family's story has shaped my view of Judaism and my own Jewish identity. Growing up, I listened to the stories of loss, strength, and resilience in my own family. My relatives perished due solely to the fact that they were Jewish. It is a privilege to be able to identify and practice as a Jew in this country, and I realize that I'm truly fortunate. I have found community with the Jewish people, and I am proud to be Jewish. I am so incredibly blessed to have my grandma in my life. It is a demonstration of her inner strength and her true resilience that she has been able to turn the horrific experiences of the Holocaust into positive life lessons that she has imparted to generations of my family. And I'm sure that my grandma's influence will be felt for generations to come. I love you so much, Grandma.
Ellen?
That was an amazing testimony. I just want to take this opportunity to thank Edith and her family. It was an honor and a privilege to hear your important story and to hear from not only your daughters, but your granddaughters and your grandson-in-law. And I feel like I know them better. I've heard you speak of them many times, and now I feel like I know them. I'm not surprised. The acorn doesn't fall far from the tree. I want to thank Edith for taking the time to share her story with us and her entire family, her daughter Carol, and her granddaughter Tara Roach, her other daughter Janice, and her husband Andrew, and her 4 granddaughters Lauren, Rebecca, Katie, and Megan, and her 5th granddaughter Tara, who I mentioned, and Megan's husband Brandon, who is Edith's grandson-in-law. Thank you so very much for sharing today. It's a triumph that you are here. It's a miracle that you are here with your family and your daughters and granddaughters and the rest of your family. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the entire Yom HaShoah committee, my co-chairman George Klein, Shirley Silberstein, and Abe Diesenhaus, the clergy, Rabbi Yaffe, Rabbi Schifrin, Rabbi Green, and Cantor Schroen. But I especially want to thank Rabbi Yaffe, who was all things, writer, producer, director. Thank you for gathering the slideshows, for doing all the pre-recordings of the speeches, and for taking unending interest and spending the time and the effort with Edith and the rest and the candlelighters to gather their stories and testimonies, and for making this a smooth and meaningful program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ellen.
Ellen, this is Janet and Erwin from Israel. I want to tell you that it was just a wonderful, wonderful program, always done in a very, very special way by you and your committee. And of course, Rabbi Yaffe is always pretty terrific for all the things that he has done for all of us since with the Zooming. He's even taught Erwin how to Zoom. So we are very happy to be on and to thank you for this very memorable program. You know, it was very, very, very well done. Thank you again, Ellen.
Thank you very much, and welcome from the Holy Land.
Yes, Janet and Erwin, Zooming from Israel. It's my opportunity to say what an honor and a privilege it's been to get to know Edith and her family. This is the first time in all the years that we've been doing our community Yom HaShoah service that we've had a child survivor, a witness of Nazi Germany, to speak, and we've had that before. But what we haven't had is the first and second generations sharing how their connection with their mother, their grandmother, and how the story that we've all heard has become truly a defining part of their lives. So I want to thank all who spoke, and for the 2 grandchildren who somehow didn't make it, we'll get you the next time. And I hope that this day, which is just before Yom HaShoah is Monday night, tomorrow night, and Tuesday. A couple of weeks ago, many members of our community received an email that was, instead of the bag that we have been delivering for the last number of years, that bag had a person on it. And I'm going to show you that person, or one of those people. Or maybe not. Here it is, yes. Okay. You may recognize this because this was the cover of the bags that we couldn't pass out this year. But we sent these labels to nearly 1,000 people. And it's our hope that everyone will read these labels. They are spoken in the first person. I need you to remember me. If you don't, who will? And there are different people. This was Bertha's note to us. And she says there are things that you can do. You can light a candle on Monday night and say a prayer on my behalf. You can attend this service that we've just completed, and you can commit to fulfilling one more mitzvah and to making a donation to help feed a Holocaust survivor living below the poverty level. There is a message from these people. Remember me because I'm part of your family. Remember me because of all the things that could have been and never will be. Remember me in order to remember the humanity within all of us, to make the world a better place for today and tomorrow. I hope that we can all hear the voices that were muted in a different way. People who were murdered. Edith talked about 18 members of her family that didn't survive. We lit candles for 6 million. And so our candle project, by lighting a candle in memory of one individual, not for all of the 6 million, but for one, and reading the biography, and putting that candle in the window to show that as long as we continue to live and be Jewish, the spirit of those who were murdered will continue to live on and continue to bring brightness to our world. If you didn't read that email, look for it. And maybe we'll even send another one tomorrow. Beneath Bertha Adler's requests are this year's contribution of our community to the Daffodil Project. There is a Daffodil Project that has the goal of planting 1.5 million daffodils in honor of the 1.5 million children whose lives were taken from them. In our community, we have planted close to 2,000 daffodils. And this year, I went to this daffodil garden that is right across from the Little Neck Shopping Center and the Little Neck Triangle. And there are 420 blossoms. We can be proud and we can thank all of those who helped to plant them, who donated money to make sure that this could happen. And I hope that as you go by the Little Neck Triangle, that you will see these daffodils and think of the brightness that they're bringing into the world, the oxygen that they're bringing into the world. And remember that this is our way of defeating the evil, of being positive, of turning the night of broken glass into blooming flowers. We hope and pray that all of those that we remember will be remembered indeed for a blessing. Today, we've heard from children of survivors. We've heard from the grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. And this story must continue to be our story. We must continue to tell it so that never, ever, ever again. Today's program said that would have been handed out if we had a gathering. But the program on the front said, never again is now. There are things that are happening, as Edith shared with us so painfully. Let us commit ourselves to do all that we can to bring goodness into the world and to rise up above the evil and to remember our past so that it will not be repeated. And now I'd like to call upon Cantor Schron, who is going to introduce Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. We always end our program on a very happy note. And today we had Janet and Erwin here from Israel. And we're going to end with a very important rendition of Yerushalayim Shel Zahav that Cantor Schron is going to share with us.
Thank you, Rabbi Yafi, and thanks to all the members of the community and the committee for a very meaningful program. Today we remember, today we mourn, but next week we celebrate. For from the ashes of the Holocaust emerged the modern miracle of the state of Israel, and it truly is nothing short of a miracle. Next Tuesday night and Wednesday, we'll celebrate that miracle and everything it represents on Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israeli Independence Day. As we transition miyagon l'simcha, from the depths of despair to a time of great joy, we always conclude our commemoration on a very positive note. In 1967, a young Israeli songwriter named Naomi Shemer composed a love letter to the city of Jerusalem, a song most of us have come to know and to love. Entitled Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, Jerusalem of Gold, the song depicts the beauty of the holy city and how far it's come after the miraculous events of the Six-Day War. And so I'm honored to call upon my family, Meirav, my wife, and my children, Simcha, Eli, Sila, and AJ, to conclude our program with the singing of Jerusalem of Gold. If you know the song, I encourage you to sing along, Am Yisrael Chai.
Avir harim saluk hayayin, v'reyach oranim, nisa v'ruach ha'arbayim, im kol ha'amonim, u'v'tarim atiman ba'en, shruya b'chaloma, ha'ir asher Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, V'Shel Nechoshet, V'Shel Or, Halu Lechol Shirayich, Ani Kinor. Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, V'Shel Nechoshet, V'Shel Or, Halu Lechol Shirayich, Hashoa Torah, Nashim Meredo Yamamelach B'derech Yericho, Yerushalayim shel zahav, Yishel nechoshet v'shel or, Halo lechol shirayim, Ani ginor, Yerushalayim shel zahav, V'shel nechoshet v'shel or, Halo lechol shirayim, Ani ginor, Yerushalayim shel zahav, V'shel nechoshet v'shel or, Halo lechol shirayim, Ani ginor, Yerushalayim shel zahav, V'shel nechoshet v'shel or, Halo lechol shirayim, Ani ginor.